We're back talking with Senator Jim Lankford. I got to ask you, given given the mood in the House and the Senate, you ever see folk that in the past have had a very calm demeanor, all of a sudden with that Alfred E. Newman look from Mad Magazine, like,
yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah, there are a lot of folks that have been there for a long time. There's been a lot of turnover in the House of Representatives. There's a very small percentage now that's left that has a long-term historical look. In the Senate, there still is some of that as well, but you're still dealing with probably a third of the Senate is new within the last 4 years.
Sure.
So there's been a lot of turnover even in the Senate. So yes, a lot of folks that have been there a long time saying this, everything's changing around me. This is different in how we're operating and trying to figure out how to be able to make it work. Does
Paul Ryan have a future?
Sure he does. Yeah, and what they're trying to work out in the House right now is a really hard, complicated thing. For instance, with the health care debate. This is not your normal bill. In a normal bill, you would have about 20 people of the 435 that are really engaged in the issues, that know it well, that are deep in it, have very specific ideas. There's another whole group that'll want to bring amendments to it, another whole group that'll say, I trust those guys, let's just vote on it. That's not so in the health care bill. Everyone's been looking at this for 8 years. Everyone has very specific ideas about how to be able to resolve it. And so now it's a matter of getting all of those ideas together and to get a final product that can work, that quite frankly can work through the Senate process as well.
It would seem that the American public is very concerned, given the number of people who have signed on to what's commonly referred to as Obamacare. If that's taken away without a replacement, they're going to be left stuck with nothing to rely on. In the meantime, as you pointed out, they've had 8 years to work on this and nothing's gelled yet. Will they produce?
Yes, they will. And it's not a matter of not having an idea, it's having 50 ideas and trying to narrow it down from 50 ideas to the final one that's going to move. It's been a really interesting conversation, a lot of the town hall meetings to be able to talk about it, about all the words that are out there to say, what is this really? Things like guaranteed issue, where people can have pre-existing conditions, still be guaranteed insurance, staying on your insurance until you're 26, lifetime caps, all those are being preserved. So all the conversation is still, those things are left intact. But what we're facing is what the theory was in Obamacare. What President Obama wanted to do was cover more people have access to insurance, and the rates would come down. Well, that's not what's occurred. Rates in Oklahoma last year went up 76% just in 1 year for the individual market. So they're skyrocketing for us, and many people can't afford it. About 9 million people that weren't covered before now have coverage, but 6.5 million people that used to have coverage now don't. Because it's too expensive and they can't get it anymore. And so we watched a swapping of groups that are insured or uninsured. So it didn't solve the uninsured issue and it didn't solve the cost issue. So we're trying to go back and be able to reevaluate that. What would do that? So we're trying to keep in things, guaranteed issue 26, lifetime caps that are working, but the things that are not, to be able to resolve those and say, let's bring the cost of insurance down, open up the number of options that people would have for insurance. Like in Oklahoma, we only have one option for insurance right now, to be able to open up the number of options for insurance and still be able to help people in that safety net.
And I think, too, there's a move afoot to let them go out of state.
Yes, there is, but I think that'll be relatively few that'll actually do an out-of-state, because that means an insurance company reaches across state lines, negotiates with a new set of doctors, new set of hospitals. If you're right along one of those border areas, that would work. But for most folks, especially in the interior of a state, you'll have very little, and there are insurance companies that already do that. The Blue Cross Blue Shield, that's the major provider, is an out-of-state insurance carrier, but they come in and follow our policies.
As of late, well, in the first 100 days, President Trump has, by his own admission, brought in a lot of folk who were attorneys, lobbyists, and the like, to fill federal positions, both at the White House and federal agencies. And in many cases, in fact, most of the cases, he's waived the ethics rules involved in those positions. In the meantime, the Federal Ethics Office has been swamped, inundated, if you will, on complaints. Why aren't you investigating this? Why aren't you doing that? There are already groups in this Republican-controlled Congress who are in a position to investigate it, who haven't, and yet there's been no word from the White House on why we've seen so many waivers. Can you say anything to that?
So every single person that comes through a Senate confirmation, there's 1,200 people that go through Senate confirmation. All of those have to have an ethics sign-off. All of them have to have an FBI background check. All of them have to have final clearance. So that's true for every single one of those folks, or they don't go through the process.
But if they get a waive off from the president on the,
Well, they
on the
would
ethics,
only be able to do that if they work in the White House, but they're not in a Senate confirmation, not in a Senate confirmed position. So, for instance, there's been a lot of heat around Steve Bannon, for instance. As an advisor to the president, he does not go through Senate confirmation, just like Valerie Jarrett didn't for President Obama, just like Karl Rove didn't for President Bush. That position serves at the pleasure of the president and serves in the White House alone. They're not in a Senate confirmation, they're not a cabinet secretary or one of those other roles. So that is a little different role in how they handle that. And the president can choose to have whoever he wants to choose to have in that type role. And that's been historically true and has also been very heated. Democrats really didn't like Karl Rove, really don't like Steve Bannon. Republicans really didn't like Valerie Jarrett. So that's just a role that's out there in that. But I would say for those of us that are on, I serve on the Intelligence Committee. We are neck deep into the Russia investigation, and we were involved in that 5 months ago.
that's not going to end anytime soon.
No, that's not.
That's so involved.
That's a big investigation.
That it's going to take quite a while for you guys to get to the bottom of it.
Right, and that's part of the issue that I keep telling people. Everybody take a deep breath. Every time you read something in the paper or online, just because, as Sean Spicer said, and I think he was right on this one, just because the president puts Russian salad dressing on a salad doesn't mean he's a secret Russian agent. Everyone needs to take a deep breath. It's getting too extreme on it. But it is a very serious charge and a very serious issue. There's no question the Russians were trying to interfere in our election. We have to engage in that. The questions still remain on if a campaign was involved in helping them, assisting them, cooperating with them. We're going through all the documents, all the background, a lot of different interviews. We'll get to the bottom of it. And what our assurance has been, Republicans and Democrats alike that serve on this Intelligence Committee, is to say we're going to lock arms together and go where the facts take us. If the facts take us to an area, that's not our fault. The facts took us to that area. We're going to try to get it resolved.
Well, I got to promise you, we're all looking forward to the results. Right. This president has, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but this president had issued a ban on Muslims traveling into this country from, I think, 6 or 7 different nations. You signed into a bill with Senator Inhofe that essentially protected the religious rights and freedoms of immigrants in this country, which would include Muslims.
Sure.
Now, knowing the history of the Muslims in the United States, who even fought with George Washington on our side, to present, there are folk out there that are so against the Muslim religion, the Muslim faith, they don't want them brought in. This president seems to want us to believe that all terrorists are Muslims, which that's not quite accurate.
Right.
How did you feel about that? I mean, you're a man of faith, and I know you signed the bill with Senator Inhofe to bring religious freedom forward before he issued that edict, and it was a ban on Muslims.
So I would disagree in one area. There wasn't a ban on Muslims. It was a ban on those 6 countries. In fact, the largest Muslim countries were not included in that ban.
Well, let me interrupt you there, because he went to Rudolph Giuliani and said, help me figure out a way to ban Muslims legally. Those are his words. Giuliani.
So I would only say if that was his plan, it was a really poorly written plan to be able to do it, because the 6 countries they identified, you had Iran, which is the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and you had countries where there's no functioning government, Somalia, Yemen, Syria, nations where it's breaking apart and we don't have good, accurate documents. In fact, those are the same 6 countries that President Obama and that Congress had identified as countries of particular concern. So for those 6 countries, I'm not as worried about. And what he did was he said, let's take 3 months. Let's actually review this, make sure we're getting the right paperwork in, and then we may evaluate it and reopen it back up. So obviously that's on hold right now. That was not as much of a concern for me as the issue of freedom of religion. We cannot be a nation that is afraid of people of faith, whether Muslim faith, Jewish faith, Yazidis, Christians, whatever it may be. If we're a nation that's afraid of people of faith based solely on their faith, that violates every value that we have.
But it also turns out, pardon me if you will, that he didn't extend that ban to countries that he does business with as a private citizen. Saudi Arabia, for example, was not included in that. That seems to trouble a lot of folk.
That's the first I've heard that as far as a consideration on that. Saudi Arabia has been a functioning ally of us. They have a functioning government. It's very different to talk about Yemen, who's in the middle of civil war, or Syria is in the middle of a civil war, or Somalia in the middle of a civil war than it is for a stable country like Saudi Arabia or like United Arab Emirates or Turkey or Jordan or Lebanon. I mean, those are Muslim countries that have a functioning operating government. So it's a very different issue. Or if you go to the Philippines or go to Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world, those countries were not banned. So I really don't take this as a Muslim ban. I know the flippant rhetoric during the campaign that President Trump was out there saying those things. I didn't think it was wise then. I spoke out against it at that time, and I think it leads us towards being afraid of people of faith. And we can't do that. We're open to all faiths.
We're out of time. I knew this was going to happen. I wish we had another half hour. Thank you so much for taking time. And we need your vote, by the way, public television, public radio, so help us out.
Well, glad to be able to help engage.
All right, my friend.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Perspectives. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.